This is a continuation of bottle 5, this perfume bottle with this organic leaf shape. So I have the completed structure here in the center in gray to show how all this is going to come together. So last tutorial, we did our partial revolve and we trim split the teardrop, the drop shape in the center of that. So that's the part that I have illuminated here, which is ultimately going to be this outside piece on our final bottle. So what we need to do is create this set-in area, which is set back from that surface, and we need to trim split that, but a certain distance set back. So let me show you how to do that. So I have the objects ghosted here. So this is our partial revolve. That's the revolve from the last tutorial. That is 120 degrees, and I put it on center. So what I need to do is I want to take that and I want to set that back by a certain distance. And at the time when I did that, I didn't know how much that was going to be. So let's talk about how that works. So you can see this ghosted part that I have here. What I did was I selected the surface, and I'm going to offset that inside of this. I want to set that back. Originally in this scale that I'm working in, I tried 3/8 of an inch, but it was a little too much. So I went through this whole operation with setting it back at 3/8 of an inch and did it, and I just looked, it was too drastic. So I ended up doing, let's see, this should be a negative 0.25. So I went to 1/4 of an inch to set that back. I think that's what I did. Let's check. Okay, so this is working in the opposite direction. That went out by 1/4 of an inch. So instead of negative 0.25, and I'm going to move this surface in, and you'll see this happen. It'll come in. Well, that was even too much. That's not what I did. So I probably did 3/16, see 0.18. That's what I did. So there's that surface that I set back from our original surface. That original surface is the one we created last time. So this is set back now. So I need to trim split this with a different guideline. So let's talk about that. So we can see the grayed area is the surface I had. This is the new surface. And I want to trim that, and I want to show you how we need to trim that. We need to trim that with this clearance, with this space in here, because I'm going to loft and create a surface which gives us this nice bevel area in here. So once I put that together and stitch it, I can get this nice radius and blend that surface in there. So let's just take a look at this in 3/4 view. So that surface is set back and trimmed. That's what we're going to do in this tutorial. So this is that surface that is set in. So as a guide, I'm going to go back now. I'm going to go back between my layers. So I brought in this surface that wasn't trimmed from the previous layer. And now I want to bring this surface in. So what I'm going to do here is move one copy. Very quickly, click. So I have created a copy right on top of it without moving it at all. And I'm going to change the layer. And put that to this active layer that we're working on, which I'm calling Loft Edges. So there's that surface that we had created in the last tutorial sitting in front of this other surface. But now I need to trim the surface in the back. So I brought in my line work that I had from last time, this line. And I also brought in on Ghost, here we go, this partial line at the bottom. And this is where I started. Originally, that line was out here to trim that first part. So all I did was scale it in, and I'm guessing, I don't know exactly how much. I'm trying to think to myself, if I were to create a beveled edge in there, how much less would I want to do? Again, this is a little bit of a trial and error. So I brought it in about that distance. That's the best I can tell you right now. I just scaled it in. And then I brought in this line work, this straight line work. So all of this is flat. This is back here, it's flat. I'm creating another line that I'm going to trim this other surface with. I'm trying to create almost a symmetrical path between these two surfaces. Almost. It's not absolutely critical, but it's close. So again, I am moving these points around and doing trial and error with my create curves to get something that looks parallel to that. So I'm using this as a guide. It took some time. So I am going to now do, and I did this with max degree of 3. Both of these are max degree of 3, particularly because I have this center point in here, which is helping me straighten out that curve there. So it's creating a nice tension coming out of that round at the bottom, coming up, going straight, and then whipping back and creating this nice negative curve. It's very important for this kind of this leaf dynamic. So there it is. Magical. It took some time. So now you can see this nice even path all the way, especially in here because we're getting involved with draft angles. I don't want to dwell on that too much, but just to get this out of the mold, we need a nice clearance in here. And then coming up, and I have this nice step at the top here. So that's the curve that I need to trim this surface here, which is stepped back from what we have. I'm just going to undo that so I can keep that line because I have that already created here. So there's one of the curves. And I have the other curve on the other side. So here I'm now unghosting that curve. I created it on one side. I joined it to the bottom half curve and I mirrored that curve over and I joined it to that. So now I have this one continuous curve, and it's very important that it starts up here. I need to trim that perfectly. So when I move my lines around, I locked to that point up at the top. Very important. So I locked that straight line first, and then I curved it. So that endpoint will absolutely lock into the top of that. So if we go into 3D mode, it's back here, but from the front view, it is definitely locked into that front of that point. So I'm going to trim this surface that I'm selecting right now with that line to give us that part we need. So trim split with line. We want the center of this object. I don't want the object from out here. I want the object from the center. So when I do my trim split with line, stitches off, I'm going to select the part from here, and I'm going to select this line that I've created that's illuminated right now that comes all the way around. I'm going to trim that. So now I have that surface step back from that panel. So the next step is pretty straightforward. I'm just going to ghost these other objects here. We don't need them, but we want to save them. So now I have this surface and I have that surface. And I have broken up into several lines. I have this curved line, I have the curve at the bottom, and I have the curve here. That actually is very beneficial. If I try to do this in all one curve without that break in there, it would be challenging. The program would have trouble lofting all of that. So now all we have to do is loft a straight line. So if you remember lofting, we can select our segments. So if I select this segment and that segment, and I go to our tangent loft, I have now created that surface. Look at that. It's very nice. It blends that front panel into that panel. So if I take these and stitch them together, I can radius those edges. And I have a nice angle in there, and that'll help with molding, which I'll talk about later. I'm always looking at this parting line, how this is going to be molded. So that will be able to clear after I radius that. So that worked really, really well. So I'll do the same thing down here at the bottom. I'm going to select these two, and we're going to loft that. And I'm going to take a look at those iso lines, those tiny little lines in between, and they look very symmetrical. They're coming in very nicely from what they're not crooked and they're not all over the place. They're not strange looking. So it's very clean. So let's take a look at this one. Grab that one and that one and loft. Let's take a look. Okay. All right, this doesn't look very good. You see these iso lines? These things are very on an angle. They're not very clean. They're not like transitioning in a very smooth way. Something doesn't look right there. I mean, the surface is probably pretty good, but I just don't like that. It's like a bad sign. Compared to this surface here, this part, you see how these lines are, these little tiny lines are moving quite nicely from one to the other. They're not very crooked. And this one down here, the same thing. Over here, and you can even see the curve is not, it's not even supposed to be curved, it's supposed to be straight. And it's actually curving because they're not sitting very nicely. So that's not a very good loft. That'll probably cause problems later down the road. So I do not like that one. So I'm going to get rid of that. What's fortunate is this is a very symmetrical object, especially within these parameters. So I'm going to select this one. So all I have to do is mirror that over to the other side, and I should be in pretty good shape. So let's do that. I'll use that one instead. I need to make sure I select that. I'm going to select the top here, but I'm going to confirm that I'm on center. So I have X is 0, Y is 0. Now Z is at this dimension. That's because I'm not in the center. I'm not at 0, 0, 0, but the other two coordinates are correct. So I'm going to just go straight up, and I've now mirrored over that copy. So since everything else is symmetrical, I prefer that shape. See how nice and clean that is. It doesn't have any curvature to it. It's supposed to be a straight line. So that is, so now we have this outside surface, we have the set-in area, and we've transitioned that little surface in there. So we can evolve that and move that along and ultimately create this bottle shape. Okay, so the next tutorial, I'll continue with this.